Welcome to the Exceptionally Irresistible Show, featuring conversations with people who have demonstrated exceptional success in their lives and who have some irresistible qualities worth learning from. Come learn how others have created an exceptionally irresistible life. You too can live an extraordinary life, both personally and professionally. So sit back, relax, grab your favorite beverage, and enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Exceptionally Irresistible Show. Thank you all so much for continuously showing up. It's really appreciated. And we have another incredible guest for you, another incredible story. Somebody who stands out to me on so many levels. He's a professor, he's a speaker, he's a writer, he's a pastor, he's so many incredible things of this individual. And I share with him, a group that we're part of, a mentorship group. If you hear me talking about, and he was one of our guests on this show, Bob Berg, has the Alliance group, and Donn, who we are about to meet, I met him there, and through the discussions, he's brought up such incredible insights, and he adds so much to that group that he's just so fascinating. I was like, dude, he's got to be on the show. One more thing, he has a show of his own, the Alignment Show, and I was privileged to be a guest on that show. And it's just everything about this individual. You're going to see in one more second. I'm bringing him on. You're going to see what incredible golden nuggets this individual has. So without further ado, Donn King.
Wow, Yermi, thank you. I'm honored. I couldn't help but think, as you were saying, pastor, professor, you can't settle on one thing, can you, Donn?
Right? I think that really just drives right home. There must be a message behind all. There has to be some common theme behind all these incredible titles and these incredible, I guess, hats that you wear. If you were standing on the top of a rooftop somewhere and you wanted to scream out a certain message and you wanted the world to hear, what would that message be?
And I'll say in the context of that, I think this is pretty much true for everybody. I mean, a lot of people will have done different things, but if you can take a step back and see a thread that runs through it, there is something in everybody's life that forms their core value. And so as I look at all the different things that I've done, I think that what brings them together is I want to help people identify their own unique message and then communicate that effectively.
Mm, right, absolutely. And I mean, I know that you're a professor for communication. You're a public speaker. You're an author. You're like, there's just like the list goes on and on and on of incredibly, very impressive accomplishments that you've accomplished. And tell me a little bit more about how that each piece, or maybe highlight whatever you want to highlight. Um, how does that really bring out that uniqueness, that specialty in whoever in the person that you're dealing with? How are you doing that in a sense?
Well, and it's a good question. In my work as a college professor, for example, I'm
Mhm,
always dealing with students who are trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. And
mhm,
it's an open secret in college. Yes, employers want you to have a major, but unless you're going in engineering or medicine, it really doesn't matter what the major is.
mm,
What matters is that you have a major because it's part of that long-term complex plan.
mm,
And so I tell people I majored in journalism when I was in undergraduate school,
mm,
but that's because it was the closest I could get to not declaring a major. Journalists, by nature of what they do, get to poke their nose into all aspects of human experience. And that's
mm.
really what I was interested in. It's
Right,
why I do my own podcast. As you know, it gives me an
right.
excuse to have conversations with people I wouldn't
Mm,
otherwise get to talk with.
yeah.
So I think that drives a lot of it. Just I spent some time thinking about what my primary values were, and one
Mm,
of those top three values is curiosity.
yeah.
And so that drives so much of what I do.
I love that. And as somebody who's been privileged to be interviewed by you on your show, the Alignment Show, which I believe is we have a link on in the show notes over here to the show.
Yeah.
Something that was unique to me as being as a guest was that you are perhaps one of the best hosts I've ever had on a
Oh,
show,
thank
and you really I'm a consistent viewer and listener to your show.
you. Yes.
It's incredible to me how you bring out the best in your guest, and that's a very big inspiration to me to this show. To a lot of different elements of the show came from the inspiration of your show. um it's it really I think you hit the nail on the head with that. It's the curiosity.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me now.
Okay. Well, and I'm honored. First of all, thank you very much. And it's always been, I guess, that way with me. It can be. I guess the challenge can be that the average person, if you start asking questions, it can start to turn into an interrogation.
Right.
And I don't want to dig into people's private stuff, the things that they want
Mhm.
to protect or whatever. But I've always been curious about people's experience.
Sure.
My wife and I were at a store last week, and see, as I start telling this, it may sound, I don't know, it could potentially sound prejudicial, I guess,
Okay.
and I don't intend it that way. We saw a young man who had on a cap that was turned sideways, and dreads, and he was wearing shorts that were down low enough that his entire rear end covered with underwear, but it was showing. And it's really easy for people my age, especially, to look at something like that and be judgmental. That
Mm,
wasn't at all what was running through my head. I
mm.
wanted to ask him. I mean, I'm completely curious. How in the world do you keep those things up? How do you keep them from going all the way to the floor? Because I'm
Right.
in an age when my pants start getting that low, they're going to go all the way down. Now, I
I know
knew
that.
better than to go ask, because it
Mm,
would be viewed as
mm,
a generational prejudice or whatever.
mm.
But I'm really curious about that. I don't know how you do that.
Right.
I want
Right.
to ask people about their tattoos, just where do they
Mhm.
come from? What do they mean? But I don't want to intrude on people.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
finding a way to feed that curiosity without violating boundaries can be a challenge.
Yeah, and it's tricky, and I guess you get to feed that with your show and how you. I mean, again, as somebody who's experienced the guest side of it, um, I really felt, heard. I felt that you were really truly interested. I felt that you were genuinely interested in what I had to share. Not only my expertise, but my personal, story, my like a bunch of things. And that is, as somebody who's been a guest, it's something I really appreciate, and it really brings out the richness of the communication
Yeah.
that I guess, and I'm assuming that that's probably something you teach. Is it not? Is that part of?
It is. It is. When I teach speaking, whether I'm teaching corporate clients or whether I'm teaching college students,
Hmm.
there's a tendency on all of their parts, whether it's self-deprecation or shyness or imposter syndrome. There's all kinds of things that can come from, but
Hmm.
people will be reluctant to talk about themselves and their own experience. And
Hmm.
so they'll go out on the internet and do some research, or they'll turn to a book or whatever. And the internet has sped this up, but ever since Gutenberg invented the printing press, if it's
Hmm.
just about information, there's a whole lot easier ways to both spread it and, especially from an audience standpoint, to gather
Right.
it than to go
Mm,
somewhere, maybe drive somewhere for a half an hour, spend a half an hour listening to somebody or an hour listening to somebody talk. If I just need the information, I can
mm.
spend 5 minutes on the internet and get it
Right.
faster.
Right.
The thing that, like, when you were a guest on the show, your experience at driving across the country about 2 feet in front of COVID, uh, that you can't look that kind of
Mm,
thing up on the internet. It is
right.
unique.
Right.
And in the process, this has been my discovery over the years. When you are being the most personal, your unique experience, your point of view, whatever it might be, you're most likely to touch that which is most universal in the listeners. And I find
Mm,
that to be an interesting
yeah,
juxtaposition, you know.
yeah, yeah.
But
That's
you
so
can't
true.
go you can't go look it up on the internet, you know. And that's
Mhm.
the real value. The way I put it in short terms is the most important component of your speech is
Mm,
you and what you
mhm.
bring to it, because we can get the information lots of other places.
Sure.
We can't get you except right here.
Mm. And Don, you're mentioning something that here's what's coming up to me when you're saying that. We're talking obviously in the context of a show, a host, or whatever, but I think this is true across the board. Whether you're a public speaker, whether you're a teacher, whether you're in business, whatever the
Oh yeah.
case is. Here's what's coming to me, Don, from based on what you're sharing, is that as the person who is asking the questions, I'm right now sitting in the controlling seat of the conversation. I'm using that quotation.
Yes.
Um, it's almost up to me to really bring out the best in you. And and
Hmm.
and that to me is actually really almost like, as I'm talking, as I'm saying this is an epiphany moment for me right now. If I'm right now talking to a prospect, to a business, potential,
Hmm.
and by me asking the right questions to discover, are we going to work well together? Is what I have a value to that person? All that stuff. But by me asking the right questions, I'm empowering the potential client to be the best version of themselves through this conversation. I've never heard of that in that context before. Would you agree with me on that?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the keynote speeches that I do is entitled "The Art of the Question." I've always contended
Mm,
that asking a good question is more
mm,
important than finding good answers.
wow.
And that's a big sweeping statement, but
Sure.
when you ask a question of somebody and it's pulling out their experience, it changes their view of their own experience.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
a part of basic education, and when I say basic education, I don't mean like elementary, junior high, high school. Just the underlying idea of education. The
Mm,
word educate comes from the word educe, which means to draw forth from. And we
mm.
tend to think of education as being a putting into. You sit
Right,
there
right.
and
Yeah, I
listen
was
while
about to
I
say.
talk, and that may be the tool of education,
Mm,
but it's not education. And so it's a good question about what are we drawing forth from people.
mm,
So we're drawing forth abilities and skills and insights, self knowledge, uh, points of view by
mm.
asking the right questions. People may be telling us something that's familiar to them, but they've never thought of it that way before.
Yeah. Wow.
Maybe they haven't thought of the meaning of it. What does it mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's a favorite cartoon of mine from Gary Larson, the Far Side cartoons, if you remember those. It shows two guys that are in a boat on a lake. They're fishing.
Mm-hmm.
In the background, you see mushroom clouds. There's
Okay.
an atomic war going on, just
Oh
started up.
gosh. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And one of them says, "What does it mean, Gary? What does it mean?" I'll tell you what it means. It means screw the limits. Now, Larson had a twisted sense of humor, has
Uh-huh.
because he's still working. But that to me spoke volumes, because
Mm,
meaning is always, it's not something that's out there, it's in the way
mm.
we view it.
Right.
Old dead Greek guy Epictetus once said, of course he said it in Greek, so this is a loose translation. He said, it's not what happens to you, but what you think about what happens to you that determines
Mm.
your experience.
Sure.
So
Sure.
questions can draw that out, and I
Mm.
think that's a great insight that you have there.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of it as gravity, like like I think you were in my work of happiness course, that when I gave it in the group.
I don't,
I don't remember.
oh wait, yeah, I was the overview kind of thing. Yes, I
Yeah,
was in
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Good. Yes.
So the work of happiness, we talk about how focused energy pulls. Okay. And the idea here is like, you know how water is always flowing to the ocean? Because the
Mhm.
ocean almost kind of like sits below and is allowing gravity to do its thing. And
Mhm.
it's the place where everything pools to, in a sense. And so that drawing energy is pulling. And it kind of sounds to me like instead of pushing onto somebody, what it is that you're trying to impart, the influence, whatever it is, the persuasion, the sale, the whatever it is, um, instead of pushing it, you're allowing the individual, you're inviting the individual to pull it and gravitate towards it, and that's what I'm
Mhm.
gathering from what you're sharing.
Yeah, I like that word inviting. There's I can't claim a lot of cultural knowledge of this sort of thing, but I've always been
Mhm.
interested in Eastern ways of looking at things.
Mm,
And if I understand it correctly, there is a phrase in Japanese Zen Buddhism as they ring the bell, they don't say ringing the bell, they call it inviting the bell.
mm,
And I think
interesting.
that's a very insightful phrase.
Yeah.
And it's reminiscent of Taoism, the
Mhm.
idea of being receiving and open and like water.
Mm,
Yeah, that image speaks to me. I think you're onto something there.
yeah. So let me ask you this, Don. Was there a defining moment in your life, in your career, in your whatever, however you define it? Was there any defining moment which you've discovered this message of, that uniqueness of individual communication, bringing out that uniqueness? Could you pinpoint it by any means at all?
That's a great question. I'm not sure that I can point to any one. There have been a
Mm,
series of
mm,
epiphanies, for lack of a better term.
sure.
I went through a time 20 years ago of coming up with positioning statements. What was the name of the book? There was a book called Life 101. I
Mm,
think it's out of print now. But they were talking in that book about the difference between goals and mission, I think was the terms that they used.
mm,
And they would say things like mission is more like direction. Goals would be achieving that.
mhm,
I'm not expressing it very well. I remember one of the examples they gave, for example, if your mission in life was west, okay, from where I am, a goal then might be Nashville, Little Rock, Oklahoma City. You know,
mm,
eventually you could get all the way around the world, come back to where I am now. If the mission still remains, so now the new goal might become New Orleans and then Houston and
mm,
okay. And so they said, if I remember correctly, because it's been a long time,
mm,
missions are discovered,
mm,
goals are set.
I like that.
And so, the goal is kind of a means to an end, but you got to ask yourself, well, what's the end?
Mm,
Missions are never ended.
mm,
So to me, this gets kind of close to this idea of what's your purpose in life.
yeah,
That was kind of behind the way of the 3-year-old why.
I was
And
about
I
to say, yeah.
and I don't think how would I put
Mhm.
this? I'm at a point in my life where I'm on the verge of retiring from teaching college.
Mm,
I don't think my mission will have changed. I think the way that I express my mission in life will change
mm,
because I'm shifting from spending time in the classroom to spending time at a keyboard with
right,
writing.
right.
So you had asked a little while ago about defining moments and all that sort of thing. In a way, I'm still discovering it. I had somebody in class just recently who's a senior citizen going back to school, and
Wow.
he made the tongue-in-cheek comment, "I'm trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up." I think that's kind of a lifelong mission, you
Sure.
know.
Yeah.
So I'm getting a better
I like
sense
that.
of it, but my understanding is shifting. I don't think that
Mhm.
the mission is changing. I think maybe my understanding of the mission is changing.
Yeah. You started talking about the 3-year-old why, which is something I wanted to bring up, but this was the leading question to that. So thank you for reading into that, and I'm using that as a pun as well.
No.
But I think you have a little image of the 3-year-old Y if you
Let's see if
want to
I
put
can
that
put it up
on.
here in the
There you go.
corner.
There you
Yeah,
go.
there we are.
Yeah,
And
this is
I
an incredible
make it
book.
a
I read
little
it.
bigger
Oh,
for a bit here because I don't know if people, whoop, I don't want to just move it
there
around.
you
Grab
go.
the corner, Don. There we
Oh, there
go.
you go. Yeah. So I read this book. It's a phenomenal book. I highly encourage it to many, many. Um, tell me how that draws into that mission. How does that? Yeah, I believe this is a business parable. It's a parable. I know that.
It is a business parable,
Mhm.
which is not a BISAC category, the standard
Mm,
categories that booksellers use. One of the inspirations you had mentioned Bob Berg. He and
sure.
John David Mann wrote the Go
Go give it
Giver,
to us. Mhm.
and that led to the Go Giver Leader and the Go Giver Influencer, and so there's several related books there, all
Sure.
business parables. One of
Mhm.
the things that strikes me about them is if you read in fiction, for example, if you read Harry Potter, you're going to go find all the Potter books in one place in the bookstore.
Mm. Mhm.
The Go Giver series, it is a series, but they're all over the place in the bookstore
Oh,
because one's in sales, one's in business, one's in marriage and family. You
yeah.
know, so it's an unusual genre. It combines
Yeah.
aspects of fiction and nonfiction. It's using
Mhm.
fiction to teach nonfiction principles.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's when we're talking about a business parable. What are some others that we would name? Who moved my cheese is one. The richest man
Mm.
in Babylon, the
Well, Jeff
greatest
West,
salesman in the world.
our friend Jeff West.
Yes,
He's got a few of those.
most
Like
recently, his first one was the
Traveler or something. Am I
it's a
saying the
tour
name?
guide.
Tour guide. Yeah.
And
One of
Jeff,
our
if you're
yeah.
listening, I'm sorry I'm not pulling it out right now, but you can look for Jeff West and find it. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
I'll look it up here in just a second. But he
Sure.
wrote the tour guide, the unforgettable tour guide, or something like
That's
that.
right. Yeah.
And then said the lady with the blue hair,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
most recently, Streetwise to Saleswise, written
That's an
with
incredible book.
Bob Berg. Okay.
Yes.
So this and
Yeah.
then we mentioned John David Mann. He's written several
Mhm.
other business parables.
Mm.
Uh, One that a lot of folks will recognize is the Latte Factory.
Oh, that was
He
yeah.
he
Okay.
was a
Oh,
co-author on that.
okay, co-author. Okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
and
Yeah.
and then the most recent of those with John David Mann was The Vagrant. Okay, so
Mhm.
this is a
Yeah.
genre,
Yeah.
but if you look it up on Amazon, you will find a lot of things that will respond if you put in business parable.
Interesting.
But they are all over the place,
Mm.
and so it's kind of interesting. But
Yeah. So just to kind of like wrap it up on the way of the 3-year-old Y. So a reader is now reading the 3-year-old Y, an amazing story, so many incredible lessons, but going back to that message of like finding that unique voice that through the communication, through the I don't want to give away too much of the book. I'm
right,
hoping people are going to read it, obviously. But
no
one
spoilers.
one inspiration, one piece that kind of like ties the message and the book together. What would you say that is?
Well, for folks who know me pretty well, they will recognize things in the book. And so I want to say it's not autobiographical, it is inspired by
Mm.
my real life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dan Roberts is the protagonist, the focal character.
Sure.
He is a little later in life. He's struggling to get and keep a speaking business going while taking care of a disabled daughter and a partially disabled wife. So life
Mm.
keeps getting in the way.
Sure.
There is a mentor, one of the things we have her say, Callie is the mentor. She's a barista, and she said
Mm-hmm.
baristas are sort of like bartenders for sober people, you know.
Love it.
Uh,
Yeah.
so a person who helps with
Mhm.
reflection and
Mm.
uh, prodding Dan to figure
Mhm.
out what do I really want to be doing with this next stage of my life.
Mm.
And so there's an underlying message of inspiration. That inspiration is not something that really comes from the outside, but something that is drawn forth. Here we are with educing again.
Right.
and five principles. The idea of the title is you ask why the way a 3-year-old would. That
Mm,
is, you're not going to be satisfied with surface answers.
sure.
You
Like
know,
deeper.
why are you in sales? Well, I want to make good money. Well, why do you want to make good money? Well, I want to
Yeah.
buy a good house. Why do you want to buy a good house? And so you keep
Go
going until
deeper,
you get
deeper.
to something that truly has meaning to it.
Right, right. Do you find I have one or two last questions and then we are getting over time here, but I'm so inspired by you, Don. So I
And,
there's
and
such
I'm
a
sorry
great
to go on, but yes,
yeah,
yes,
no, but
that's
here,
true.
last thing is that um you're mentioning that it's a certain character who is a little bit, later on in life. Um is that only for older people, or is it like is there a message that could also relate to maybe, somebody of my age? I'm pretty much in the early stages of my career.
Mhm.
People that are listening are perhaps also, there's all kinds of age ranges. How would that relate to somebody? Let's say I'm in the early stages of my career, still struggling to get my business off the ground. I mean, that's the nature of business. But how would that book help somebody like me?
That's an excellent question. It does happen that the focal character is later in life, but I think these are questions that people ask themselves throughout their
Hmm.
lives. Like, one of the five, and I call them insights. They're not so much rules,
Hmm.
but one of the rules is to look for the emotion. For
Hmm.
example,
Hmm.
it happens. This struck me not too long ago, and I've never seen it anywhere else, but etymologically, it's right there at the root of the word emotion is
Hmm.
the word motion. It literally means that which moves us.
Mm,
And it's a truism among salespeople
sure,
that people don't make decisions based on logic. They make decisions based on emotion. They
right,
justify decisions based on logic.
sure,
So
that's
you have to have both, but without
mm,
the emotion, there will be no motion.
right. I
And
love
for a 20-year-old, I see, and I know we're short of time here. I see in my college students, there's two extremes. There are those who think
mhm,
I'm going to pick something that makes me a lot of money so that I
mm,
can retire by the time I'm 40, and then I can do what I really want to do.
mm,
And that seldom works out for lots of reasons.
sure,
Okay. You can go the other direction. So I'm just going to do things for love and I'll starve to death. But, the in between there is the
mm,
place really what makes you get up in the morning. If you
yeah,
can identify that,
yeah,
then you're most likely to stick with it until you
mm,
get good enough that people will pay you a good living for it.
yeah, I love
That's useful for a 20-year-old or a 68-year-old.
nice, yeah, and guys, whoever's listening or watching, that's only one of the incredible insights that are in the book. There's 4 others, just by the way, just heads up.
Right, right.
So, and I love that because I talk about this as well in my practice, the difference between motivation and inspiration.
Yeah.
And what you're inferring is that find what is inspiring to you, draw inspiration from different areas, and use that, and that's going to be your driving factor to your success, which beautifully ties into the last question I have for you, and then we really got to end it here. I mean, I could go on, and maybe you should be a repeat offender on this show, but anyway, um, but where do you draw emotion, Don? Where do you draw your, sorry, not emotion? Where do you draw your inspiration from that drives your emotion and stuff?
Oh,
Where do
man.
you draw your inspiration from?
It's interesting. It's an interesting introspective question here, Yermi, because I
Mm.
find myself sometimes surprised at the things that do arouse emotion within me. I'm on the verge of releasing the follow-up book to The Way of the
Oh,
Three-Year-Old Why, which means it's been about 3 or 4 months since I finished the writing. So, I'm in the editing phase.
yeah.
I'm reading it, and it's almost like reading it for the first time.
Wow.
And I get to a point where the lead character is confronting her impact on other people.
Mm.
And I find myself tearing up.
Wow.
And so you hear this from people all the time, but I think it really is a motivator for me when I can make a positive difference in somebody else's life. that's
Mhm.
not just satisfying to me, that gets that emotional response that
Mhm.
gives me the reason for getting up in the morning.
I love that. I'm literally I'm at loss of words. So let's just live it here. Let's this is I think this is the key message is that find something that really is worth living for, fighting for. I would say even going as far as dying for. You have to be
Yeah.
like hot on this. It's inspiring, and that's what gets you up in the morning. I think that's a wonderful, incredible message to end up on. So, Donn, this has been just beyond incredible. So thank you so much. To the viewers, to those who are listening. This is another show. This is another episode. We'll see you again next week with another incredible story. And keep coming back. This is what it's all about. Take a lesson that you learned from Donn, apply it somehow in your life. And that's what ultimately it's all about. Go find your own inspiration and let it drive you. So that's it for this week. Donn, thanks again so much. And we'll see
Thank
you
you.
all again soon. That's it for this week's episode of the Exceptionally Irresistible Show. What has inspired you to take action in your life? Take action now. Take the first step, share it with a friend, or write it in a journal. Subscribe and share this episode, and remember, you too are exceptionally irresistible.